What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? Is Jordan Montgomery cooked? Is Jordan Lawlar going to make the D-backs opening day roster? And updating you on the rest of the latest D-back spring training battles.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The most charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, we're going to be updating you on all the latest spring training battles, the back end of the rotation, the bullpen, the utility, the catcher. So all of it, we're going to break it all down on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. So stay right there. I first want to say thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the podcast and let's break down these spring training battles. We're going to start with the rotation because we got to see the debut of Jordan Montgomery this past weekend. And my goodness, did Monty look terrible. I didn't think it could get worse in the season Monty had last year, where he was basically where Jordan Montgomery was basically Madison Bumgarner 2.0. And I thought entering this offseason, especially entering spring training, if he looked good, I still believe there was a very good chance for a bounce back from Monty entering 2025. Yes, I know he had the 6.23 ERA last season, but he came into camp over shape. He didn't have a proper training camp, a proper offseason. It was just such a weird year for Monty last year. I wanted to give him some grace. This was a guy who was coming off the World Series where he beat Arizona, was like a 3.5 ERA guy, like the 3 seasons prior. He was one of the best starters in Major League Baseball prior to 2024. So yes, I had some optimism that Monty could bounce back next year. I didn't think it was just going to be a 1 year. This is now who Monty is going forward. He is no longer this high quality frontline starter like we saw the previous few seasons. Going forward, he is in that Madison Bumgarner tier. I did not think that was going to be possible. And after watching his debut in spring training, I feel like we're going to get more of the same this upcoming season. And I know I come on this podcast a lot when talking about spring training games and say the results don't matter too much, right? A lot of guys, they get crushed, or maybe they don't have a great spring training, but it doesn't matter for the regular season. For Monty, it matters because he's trying to go out there and trying to reassert himself as a good pitcher, not the guy that we saw last year. And it just feels like he's always making excuses as to why he's not performing. Right now, he was saying he was just relying too much on muscle memory and just trying to muscle everything over the plate and not, just trying to work too fast. And it's why would you do that? You're a veteran. Why are there always an excuse as to why you didn't perform? Maybe the issue is you're just not as good as you once were. That happens for some players. They hit this wall at a really weird point in their career where they're good year after year, and then all of a sudden they just hit this cliff and fall off immediately. And it does happen to players, and a lot of times it happens to players right when you don't expect it. They hit the age of 30, then all of a sudden they're cooked. A lot of it is due to injuries, but some of it is just straight up due to performance. And I think some guys that are due to injury, but you could go look back as interesting test case. Go look at those old Giants pitching rotations with Matt Cain and Tim Lincecum. Those two guys were studs, Cy Young, winners and candidates, and both of those guys were cooked by the time they were 28, 29, 30. And you would have never expected, if you told a Giants fan Tim Lincecum and Matt Cain are going to be like out the league by the time they're 30 years old, they would not have believed you. And Monty could be another one of those guys where he was good for most of his career, has the one weird year right at the age of 31 where he comes into camp out of shape, and maybe he will just never rediscover the form he had prior to Arizona. And so at this point, I think I'm off the Jordan Montgomery experience. I mean, when in your spring debut, you walk guys, hit guys, give up hits, like 11 of your 28 pitches were strikes. Like, it was such a bad outing. And yes, it's still spring training, but I think it left such a sour taste in my mouth after just one start that I'm ready to salary dump Monty for anything. I'm ready to kick in half the deal, 80% of the money if we have to get him off the books, because I don't know if he can go into a season with the question marks of, does Jordan Montgomery have to be in the rotation as the number 5 starter? Do we use him as a bullpen piece? Because as it currently stands, if Monty's on this roster opening day, I think we have to just pay him to go away. I think we just have to be like, Monty, stay at home. We'll go into the season and you don't have to pitch for us until we find a trade partner or until we release you or something, because he just does not look good. And I think it's at the point where we're past asking questions of, is Jordan Montgomery going to bounce back? Can he still rediscover himself? Because I am slowly losing hope in that. And so when I'm looking at this D-backs rotation, Jordan Montgomery is just out for me. Fa, of course, we've seen in the World Series already for the D-backs in a playoff rotation. He's locked in for me in the D-backs one. So is Erod with that contract. And then Ryan Nelson, we'll talk about later for the bullpen piece. But for the rotation right now, I think it's going to be Burns, Gallen, Kelly, Erod, because that contract, right, making around $20 million for the next few seasons. And then Brandon Pfaadt. Yes, his second outing in spring training wasn't great, but this is still someone who was the best D-back starter for most of the first half last year. Still someone that we think has tremendous breakout potential this upcoming year. And again, if he's your number 5 starter, if Brandon Pfaadt is your 5th starter, like, that could be the perfect low pressure kind of situation for him where he gets easier matchups and he could just go out there and really strut his stuff. Pfaadt is still someone I think all D-backs fans believe in as a guy that could be like a number 2 starter for the future of this rotation. So I think that has to be the 5-man. Monty has to go somewhere else. I saw Goldschmidt Happens, great follow on Twitter. He had this tremendous tweet where he was like, would Jordan Montgomery even make the Reno Aces starting rotation? Because it's a kind of a valid question when looking at the talent in Reno. Yolber Diaz, the number 1 starter, Christian Mena, Blake Walston, Tommy Henry, and Joe Elvis. Like Tommy Henry, or excuse me, like right now, Jordan Montgomery, if I had to go into a start, I'm probably taking Yolber Diaz over Monty. Mena right now, I think, is more talented than Monty, but Monty could probably still put together a better start. But is Monty any different than like a Blake Walster and Tommy Henry? Like, if I ripped the names off the back of the jerseys, I made them all the same height, same weight, and just said, go out there and perform to the best of your talent. All 3 of those guys are probably going to look like the same kind of pitcher, not high velocity, right? All lefty type dudes. And so, Monty probably would crack the Reno Aces AAA staff, but he would be in the mix for that 3 or 4 number 5 starter with the Blake Walstons and the Tommy Henrys of the world. So D-backs need to figure out what to do with Monty before the start of the regular season, because I don't think they could go into opening day with either Monty in the rotation or in the bullpen. And speaking of the bullpen, we'll discuss how the D-backs should fill out the rest of their pen in segment number 2. But hey, if you're ever thinking about placing a little wager and trying to win some money, then the best place to do that is going to be FanDuel, because March Madness is here and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. My favorite thing to do on FanDuel is the same game parlay. When I see the Phoenix Suns are playing, I'm taking the opponent over on points, right? You take that alternate line, give me the over on whatever the projected point total was for the opponent's team. I'll still take over on Booker and KD, but definitely put the other opponent's money line or spread, whatever you want to do, because we know the Phoenix Suns are going to lose. sorry, Suns fans, but it is looking bleak right now in Arizona for your basketball team. So maybe you can at least feel better about the situation by winning some money. So if you want to win some money, just visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Again, just bet $5 and you can get $200 in bonus bets. Just go to FanDuel.com to get started. All right, back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss the D-backs bullpen and how they should fill it out. Because when looking at the rotation, obviously they have 7 starters for 5 spots, but the D-backs continue to say, despite having so many starters, we're only going to go with a 5-man rotation. And so if that's true, it's going to be the 5 guys I believe that I mentioned. Burns, of course, locked in, big money man. Zach Allen, he's not going anywhere. Merrill Kelly, Erod with the big contract too, and then Brandon Pfaadt is that tantalizing young talent to round out your rotation. I think that's going to be the D-backs 5. And then you look at the bullpen, right? You can only have 13 pitchers. That means 8 dudes in the bullpen. Right now, J Mart is locked. AJ Puck is locked, right? I guess we still have a closer battle competition, but I did not put that in my rundown because I think we all believe J Mart's going to win the closer role. They're just going through the necessary challenges to make sure he earns that spot. But I think we're all confident J Mart's going to be named the closer. So he's got a bullpen spot locked up. AJ Puck definitely locked up, setup man. Kevin Ginkel locked up. Ryan Thompson locked up. Joe Mantiply. So that's 5 guys. And then personally, I'll put him down. I'll write it in pencil instead of pen. The other 5 guys are in pen. I'll put this guy in pencil, but I do believe Kendall Graveman's going to make the bullpen. I think what we've seen from his career, how good of a reliever he's been in those as like a high-end, high-leverage reliever. He's been a guy that's been a closer. He's been a guy that's been like the setup man. Like he's typically been like a 7th, 8th, 9th inning guy throughout his career. In the last 3 seasons from 21 to 23, he was pretty good. Of course, he missed all of 2024, but if you get the guy prior to his injury, that's a very good reliever. And so right now, I believe he has a very good chance of making this D-backs roster, and I do think he will. I do have him slotted in as one of my D-backs relievers, and so I'm writing him in as pencil. Maybe you guys think he's still potentially on the outside looking in, but I think those are the 6 relievers currently slotted to go in the D-backs bullpen. So with that being the case, that leaves only 2 spots left in the pen for Jordan Montgomery still, if he's still on the roster. Ryan Nelson, who's the D-backs best starter last year. Bryce Jarvis is still there. Dre Jameson, who's coming back, just like Bryce Jarvis. Both those guys coming back from injury. Dre Jameson missed all of last season, but Bryce Jarvis did pitch last year and looked good for Arizona. Yulbert Diaz, he's still around. He's someone that has incredible stuff. Maybe want to see him more as a starter, but we know what he can do already on the major league level with his sample size they had last year, where he was a good starter, good reliever for Arizona. Got Shelby Miller in a camp. Maybe he could be like that redemption story because, of course, the Shelby Miller deal from back of the day kind of really set this franchise back a little bit. When you traded for him for the Braves, you traded Dansby Swanson, and he just ended up being a major bust. But he was incredible in 2023 as a reliever. It just depends, can you get that guy back? And then you still got Kyle Nelson as well for a bullpen spot. So that is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 7 guys for 2 spots. And it's going to be tough. Those are 7 quality arms that all have different cases as to why they should be in the D-backs bullpen. But I kind of know what direction I want to go in. Like, I love Yulbert Diaz, but I think where the D-backs are coming from, they want him to continue to develop as a starter, want to get as many opportunities as possible. That's the other thing. Like, as talented as Yulbert Diaz is, and it would be cool to throw him in the bullpen, a guy that could throw 96, 97, like, yeah, that guy would be super useful. But if you ever want him to eventually be a starter or have any chance of being like a mid-rotation starter for you, he's going to need more reps, more opportunities, and he's just not going to get that on the major league level. At best, like we're saying, he's going to be the 6th, 7th, 8th reliever in the D-backs pen. Or he could go to AAA and be like the number 1 starter for the Reno Aces. And so as much as we love Yulbert, and I still think we'll see him pitch at some point for the D-backs this upcoming season, I expect him to start the year in AAA so he could pitch for those Aces. But Don't be surprised if we see Gilbert Diaz called up sooner rather than later if there's an injury. Shelby Miller, like I mentioned, he's intriguing. He's a guy that was really good in 2023, but outside of that year, it's not like he's really been that dominant. And I'm more thinking along the lines that 23 was like an outlier year for Shelby. Like he pitched for the Dodgers, where it feels like everyone has their career year with the Dodgers. Maybe we need to do some more investigating to that. But outside of like 23, he has not been a very good or effective pitcher really at all. A 4.53 ERA last season. In 2022, he didn't pitch a ton. I mean, he really didn't pitch a ton between 22, 21. 2020, he didn't pitch at all. So the 3 prior seasons to his Dodgers year, he really didn't even have that large of sample size. And then he goes to the Dodgers, has an incredible 1 year, goes to the Tigers last season, and is back to just kind of being mediocre. Like you look at his career numbers for Shelby Miller, and he's been kind of average. Not even average. He's been pretty bad ever since he got traded to Arizona. His career numbers are pretty terrible outside of that 1 year with LA. And so if you're telling me we're bringing that guy back to 2023 Shelby Miller, then yeah, that is a guy who could be a really good, effective back-end reliever for the D-backs. That's 1 year out of like 7 years since 2016. And I just don't think what we saw in 2023 is that replicable. So I'm probably out on Shelby Miller as a D-backs bullpen piece. Still got Kyle Nelson in the mix, so I think it's still super interesting and intriguing as a guy who we've seen have real success with the Arizona Diamondbacks. It's not like Kyle Nelson has never been good for the D-backs. We've seen him have real success 2022 prior to his injury last season. Even 23, he wasn't that bad, still had double-digit strikeouts per 9. And so the real question for the D-backs is, do you need 3 lefties in your pen? I think that's what it comes down to for Kyle Nelson. You already have AJ Puck, who is dominant, elite, going to be your setup guy. Still have Joe Mantiply, who at this point, like, where does Joe Mantiply rank on like the greatest D-backs relievers of all time? Because he might be climbing up that list. Mantiply has been here since 2020. This is going to be his 6th season with Arizona. He's got a career 3.77 ERA with us. He's got the All-Star team in 2022. Like, Joe Mantiply kind of has been a revelation for Arizona. Is that fair to say? If you look at his last 4 years, outside 23, he's been a pretty good reliever for Arizona. So excited to see what he could do again in 2025. And so when looking at this pen, I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to give Ryan Nelson a spot in the bullpen. Of course, he probably wants to be in the rotation, and he has a legitimate case to be there considering he was the best D-back starter last year. But as we keep saying, we just have too many guys, and I think Ryan Nelson sadly is going to be squeezed unless we trade like an Erod or something like that. I think sadly Ryan Nelson will get squeezed, but we saw him as a reliever last year for Arizona, and he was quite effective in that role. 13 innings pitched as a reliever, only allowed 1 earned run. He was the perfect kind of long reliever out the pen last year for Arizona. And with a guy like Erod, who was not very good last season, pair Ryan Nelson with the days Erod is pitching. If you know Erod is starting, just have Ryan Nelson warmed up and ready to go just in case things go awry. So I would love Ryan Nelson. And also, I just want him on the major league level, just in case there's injury. We don't have to waste any time. Ryan Nelson, you're ready to go. You can be that spot starter for us. So I'm definitely going to give him 1 or 2 bullpen spots. And then for the other bullpen spot, it really comes down to me. Bryce Jarvis versus Dre Jameson. I love both of these guys. Bryce is someone that we saw last year be pretty effective for the D-backs in that long relief role. Dre Jameson is someone we saw be pretty effective prior to 24 when he was healthy, real electric stuff. I think the question is, what kind of reliever do you need to be? What kind of reliever do you want for that last spot in the bullpen? Because Jarvis is more in that Ryan Nelson, Kendall Graveman role, where he would be more that long reliever, spot starter, more of that bridge reliever to get it to the back end of the bullpen, right? That's more of that Bryce Jarvis. But Dre Jameson, that's a guy that could be potential for a 7th inning guy, maybe steal like the Kevin Ginkel spot if he pitches well enough. Like, Dre Jameson has high leverage, high velocity back end armor in on him. Meanwhile, Bryce Jarvis still throws hard, still a high velocity arm, but it feels more like a long reliever bridge reliever to get to the back end of the bullpen. So I love both of those guys. It really just depends what the D-backs prefer in their last spot in the bullpen, but I'm definitely putting Ryan Nelson as my long reliever, and then I'll look at my options and choose between either Bryce Jarvison or Adrian Jameson because I don't think you could go wrong with either one. Now we'll discuss the possibility of Jordan Lawlar making the D-backs opening day roster in segment number 3. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called all-in pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You could get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Welcome back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss a couple more D-backs bullpen competitions that we got going on. I want to discuss the backup utility and the backup catcher. We're going to start with the backup utility because Torey Lovullo has been making some comments about the possibility of Jordan Lawlar making the D-backs opening day roster. I will say, it sounds like the possibility of Jordan Lawlar winning the utility job is increasing by the day, because Lovullo has quite literally said Lawlar can definitely win this job. Now, I still think D-backs probably want to start him in AAA so he could get everyday opportunities, just like we said with Yulber Diaz. It's cool to see Yulber Diaz on the major league level, right? He has the talent and the stuff to be a D-backs reliever right now. Could be the 6th, 7th guy in the bullpen, throws hard. But if he wants to really develop as a starter, he has to go to AAA and get those starting opportunities and reps. And Jordan Lawlar, yes, he probably could come to the D-backs opening day, be our utility guy, and be incredible at it. He could definitely be the Kevin Newman role. That's not a doubt. But if you want to make sure he's getting the most of his talent, getting as many opportunities and reps as possible, then you're going to start him in AAA. And so that's really the question for the D-backs. Are you okay bypassing everyday opportunities at the start of the season for Jordan Lawlar because you think he's that ready for the utility role and you think you will have enough opportunities for him on the major league level? That's really the question. Last year, Kevin Newman did have himself a pretty decent size role with Arizona, despite being the utility guy. Still had 111 games played, still had almost 300 at bats. Like, it was still a very productive season in terms of opportunities, and he was really useful, really needed. And so for Jordan Lawlar, that could definitely be him too. Lovullo has talked about, yes, we know Lawlar could play on the left side of the infield, shortstop or third base. But let's give him some reps at second base in case there's a Ketel Marte injury. Let's get him some reps there to also make sure he could do that. So the D-backs are really doing their due diligence to make sure if he did win the utility role, all the boxes would be checked. And so I do think the odds of Jordan Lawlar making the team are high, but I still don't think he's number 1 in the power rankings. I might have him like number 2 on this list. I think he's the most talented guy. I think he's the guy people want the most on the major league level. But at the end of the day, I just believe the D-backs are going to want to give Jordan Lawlar as many starting opportunities as possible, considering he's still a guy that's dealt with so many injuries throughout his career, still doesn't have like a large sample size of games played under his belt already as a professional. And he's still super young. It's not like this guy's like a 26-year-old prospect where it's like, okay, if it doesn't happen for Jordan Lawlar this year, it's never going to happen. Like, Lawlar's 22, going to be 23 years old. Maybe he starts the season in AAA, then by the deadline, we bring him up if there's like an injury or if guys on the roster just aren't performing. But as it currently stands, I think Jordan Lawlar will probably start the season in AAA. Even though he's playing really good baseball, you look at his numbers this spring training, really good. I think he's shown a lot. I just think the D-backs want to give him as many reps as possible. So I would expect him to start in AAA, but I wouldn't be surprised at this point if he does make the D-backs opening day roster. I just think when you look at guys like Gray Kessinger, Tim Tawa, Garrett Hampson, Vargas, the D-backs are just going to go with someone else. Tim Tawa is someone I think is super intriguing as a name, someone that crushed in the minor league level last year. I would probably put him at the bottom of the ranking this spring training just because I don't think he's been great at the plate and probably still feels a little bit more green. D-backs did trade for Gray Kessinger, so that feels like gives him a little bit more credence into him like winning the backup utility role. But he does seem like a defense first guy, which the D-backs love. They love defense first players, but if he doesn't really have any other skills that could help me, a great bat, contact ability, speed, I don't know. I just feel like we could probably get that defense from somewhere else, considering I feel like there's a lot of decent defensive players around Major League Baseball who don't have a good at bat. Like, if you want someone like that, why wouldn't we just sign like Jose Iglesias, who just went to the Padres, right? Bring back Nick Ahmed if you just want all defense, no offense. So I don't know if we would actually choose Gray Kessinger despite us trading for him. Yamardo Vargas, we've seen him in the Arizona uniform before a couple times. He's having the best spring training of anyone battling for the backup utility role, but I just feel like there's not a lot of upside with Vargas. I feel like we already know who he is. That's why my pick would actually be Garrett Hampson. Prior, it was Blaze Alexander, but he's dealing with an oblique strain that might take him up until opening day. If that's the case, I like Garrett Hampson as the backup utility guy. Really good defensive versatility, can play all over the infield and the outfield, having a solid spring training at the plate, 300 average, almost 800 OPS, and his speed is a real weapon. So I got defense, I got speed, and some contact ability, and he's been in the NL West. He knows the competition. I think I would choose Garrett Hampson as my choice for the backup utility role if Jordan Lawlar doesn't win it. And then look at the backup catcher. I think this is going to go to Jose Herrera most likely. I think the main reason is it's because he's out of options. You can't send him back to AAA. So it's either he's making the roster or he's not. And so he's also played pretty well at the plate this spring training. When looking at the numbers, they're way better than Adrian Del Castillo's. I still think there's a world where we see both of these guys on the major league level because I think Jose Herrera could be the backup catcher. And then, like I've been saying, if Pavin Smith does not perform well, he's another guy out of options. If he does not perform well those first couple months of the season, by the time we get to deadline, I would not be surprised if the D-backs went in another direction and said, ADC, you be our lefty DH, and now you get to be in that Jock Peterson, Pavin Smith role as just an offensive bat, offensive weapon. And so I would not be upset at all if that happened for Adrian Del Castillo. But we are going to give Pavin Smith, friend of the pod, his grace, his opportunity, and we'll see what he can do with it. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.